heard my good friend Jamie Montgomery was having a conference today, so I thought I'd drop in. I have a couple of friends here, Keith Stryer from NVIDIA, and Martin, whose name I can't quite pronounce, who's from Denmark. And hey, so we have an incredible program here. It's the first time we're going to give an award. It's called from the Technology Diplomacy Network. Keith approached me about this. It's an opportunity for the private sector and the public sector to get together. So NVIDIA and March Capital and the Montgomery Summit put our heads together with Martin's guidance and picked an outstanding representative of the U.S. government to award, and also just encourage the collaboration between the Western nations to work together in these important areas that you'll hear about today's panel: cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, which, as we're so proud to work in areas that are of national, international significance, it's important that we work together to build these industries that can propel our economy forward and assure our national sovereignty and national security. So with no further ado, Keith, come join us on stage, and Martin, come on up.
All right. Thank you, sir. Jamie. Thank you, Jamie. It's great to be here for, I think this is my 4th year. I know many folks have been here for a
Fifth year is free.
5th year's free. That's great. I love it. Hey, it's a real privilege to be here. You know, if you look at the world's top 10 companies, I think 8 of them are tech firms now, right? It feels like every company has to be a technology company, and we just had a 2-hour tech diplomacy lunch. It was really fascinating, great dialogue, and someone said, all diplomacy will be tech diplomacy, essentially, right? That's kind of where we're headed, right? It's very hard to untangle that, and so this new emerging field of tech diplomacy, which I think is less than 10 years old, right? It's 7 or 8 years old. This field, this domain, is incredibly important, not just to diplomacy, but to our global economy, to our I think, shared vision of the future. And we have to recognize and we have to acknowledge leadership within that domain, because it's critically important. Whether we know it, whether we fully understand it, leaders in tech diplomacy are playing a vital role in the future of business and the future of diplomacy. So I'm very honored to be a part of the team here that helped kind of put this together. And I want to thank Martin for your leadership, both as a former diplomat and as a visionary, to kind of give us something to do together. And so this is the inaugural year of the Tech Diplomacy Lunch at the Montgomery Summit, and the inaugural year...
We're going to need a bigger room next year.
Yeah, that's right. And the inaugural year of the Global Tech Diplomacy Award. And with that, Martin, I'll hand it off to you.
Well, thank you so much, Keith, and thank you so much, Jamie. I really think that this is the right place to bring the Tech Diplomacy Network in our first inaugural award. The Montgomery Summit really gets it, what tech diplomacy is about. I think your focus on geopolitical issues and the very fact that these new technologies that we're all talking about, quantum, generative AI, biotech, they are not only shaping our societies, our countries, but they're also shaping the international system. And diplomacy always has been, for centuries, it's been the infrastructure of governing international relations. And this infrastructure needs an urgent upgrade. Both diplomats need to think more like entrepreneurs and investors need to think more like diplomats in order to navigate this complicated and complex international space. And I think here at the Montgomery Summit, that's exactly where you can feel that people think and are concerned and take these international issues into consideration. So it's a great, great honor for me on behalf of the Tech Diplomacy Network to award this inaugural award, the Tech Diplomacy Award, to an astonishing and astounding trailblazer in the field of tech diplomacy, Ambassador Nathaniel Fick, the US Cyber and Digital Ambassador, who has really, over the last years, transformed the US Foreign Service, made it ready for the digital transformation. He is also known and watched around the world for insisting that every US representation needs a capacity upgrade, needs tech experts in order to serve US interests, but also to upgrade tech diplomacy and international relations. One word about the award. We have our Julia Kerner, our designer of the award here. She's an Academy Award winner.
She's not giving away the baby, is she?
She's not giving away the baby, but the baby's here to represent the future, which is what tech diplomacy is about. This is her award. It represents biology, the biotech sphere. There's a semiconductor pattern there. It's the technology as well as the nature. So this is what the themes that tech diplomats deal with today and in the future to come. And we are really, really proud to have Ambassador Nate Fick here to receive this first inaugural Tech Diplomacy Award for his achievements in the field of diplomacy, transforming international relations.
Here, here, Nate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
It's a beautiful piece.
Yeah, here you go.
Julia, fantastic
Yeah,
work.
this is-
Congratulations.
You've been warned.
Well, thank you very much, Julia. Thank you. I'm so eager to take a closer look at this. And do you mind holding it? Is that okay? All right. Thank you. And Jamie, thank you, sir. As always,
You're welcome.
before coming into government, I was an entrepreneur and an investor. I loved coming to this conference as a CEO. I loved coming to this conference as an investor. And now I love coming to this conference as a middle manager at the State Department. And Martin, thank you for your leadership in bringing tech diplomats together around the world. And Keith, thank you for your partnership as always. I can't help but think about Mark Andreessen's famous line that software is eating the world. And I would argue that tech is eating our foreign policy. It's increasingly impossible to practice any aspect of international affairs without it being about technology. Every bilateral relationship, every multilateral relationship, every functional topic from climate change to arms control is increasingly dependent upon tech. And it's pretty hard to figure out how to get it right, but it's very easy to figure out how to get it wrong. We get it wrong when we go it alone. And so this idea of sovereignty, digital sovereignty, is an appealing mirage. But we actually, every country, every company, we need to replace that sovereignty framework, in my view, with something more akin to digital solidarity. And I mean it in two ways. First, we need public-minded business executives around the world, and we need government officials who understand tech and have a commercial sensibility. But also, I don't know how many countries are represented in this room. It's probably a couple of dozen. And those of us who hail from and represent rights-respecting democratic countries around the world better hang together on this, or we will surely hang separately. So we need to have regulatory harmonization, coordinated investment, and a generally shared approach. So I'm honored to be here. I'm so grateful to accept this, but please know I accept this not as an individual, but on the behalf of hundreds of technology diplomats at the Department of State who are working diligently around the world today as we sit here in places from Israel to Ukraine to China and everywhere in between. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all very much.
All right. Turn this on?
Yeah, absolutely.
I may as well just stay here. I think we're going to go. So that was the pre-show. Now for the show, the main event, and the main event is a panel, and we have an incredible panel. Please come up. So David Lin, a senior director from the Special Competitive Studies Project from Washington, which is a really interesting organization, and they're running a phenomenal AI Expo this. I think in June, if you're in DC, is going to moderate for us. And we have, of course, Ambassador Fick to join us. We have Amir from Spark Cognition and General, well, Jim, as of dinner last night, Jim. I was just, the general, the former chief of staff of the Army, just an incredible 4-decade career, brings an incredible perspective for us on the panel. So it's called Critical Technologies for National Security, but I'm not sure anything is non-critical these days. So I think you'll just cover the full gamut. So David, I'll leave it with you. Thank you.
Please. Well, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you to the Montgomery team and Keith for having us here and for giving us the space to have this really important conversation. As we all know, everything is dual use. All technology is dual use, and practically everything connected to the internet is hackable, right? And so that exposes us to this world that is both deeply vulnerable from a national security perspective, but also affords us a lot of opportunity from an innovation perspective. So I think we kicked off the Montgomery Summit this morning on a really good note. Jamie had a really interesting discussion on the overarching socioeconomic landscape that is confronting us today. What I hope to do with this panel, with this distinguished group of folks, is to really delve into get a sense of the national security landscape, of the geopolitical competition that we're finding ourselves in. So I'm joined here by this distinguished panel. Ambassador Fick, thank you for joining us, and congratulations on your award. In case we don't know already, Nate Fick is the Ambassador at Large for Cyberspace and Digital Policy at the United States Department of State, my old alma mater. Then we have joining us Amir Hussain, a board member and founder of Spark Cognition, one of the March Capital's portfolio companies. And then last but not least, General McConville, the former 40th Chief of Staff of the United States Army and now an operating partner at AE Industrial Partners. Thank you all for joining us. So let's dive into the conversation and let's try to make this a real conversation. To kick us off, I would like to ask each of you, if you wouldn't mind, kind of sharing how you view the role of technology in this global state of competition that we're in right now. At the strategic level, and I'm coming from DC, so I always cherish these moments to get out of the bubble, to kind of do a pulse check to see in what ways the discussion we're having in the DC bubble is both alike and dissimilar from those in California, for example, in the Tech Valley or in Los Angeles. But the view from DC is, at the strategic level, we're in this grand strategic global tech competition with a number of adversarial countries, with China in particular. Perhaps one rung down. We've recently, withdrawn and concluded the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq to a certain extent, but now we've seen this emergence of conflict in the Middle East and in Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine, Hamas, and Israel in particular. In each of these situations, technology is playing a really interesting and unique role. But just to go down the line here, I'm wondering if you could all each kind of just share your 3-minute observations on how you kind of view the global tech competition on both the strategic level, which is a kind of a slower, more long-term burning competition, and these really fast-paced, kinetic conflicts that are unfolding before our eyes. So, Ambassador Fick, please, over to you first.
I can probably compress my 3 minutes into one on this topic. So I would argue that technology innovation as a source of national power is increasingly foundational. And by that, I mean it sits on the same layer as more immutable factors like geography or demography or natural resources. Traditional measures of strength, like military capacity or GDP, are more and more downstream of a nation or a coalition's ability to innovate in these key technology areas. So inside the United States, we have to keep innovation and that innovative ecosystem as our guiding light, as our North Star, because ultimately it's the source of our advantage. Down a couple layers, the observation that I would make is, I hope we're not looking at a world war, but we're certainly looking at a world that is increasingly at war. And at least in the technology sphere, these conflicts are not wholly disparate conflicts. They are connected. Our adversaries and our competitors are collaborating, they're sharing know-how, they're sharing weapons, they're sharing tech. Iranian drones in Ukraine are being used in Ukraine by Russia, et cetera, many concrete examples like that. So we should not view them as wholly separate conflicts. Amir.
Well, the lens that I apply to this issue is really one of, is technology something to engage with, or is technology something to deeply differentiate with? By that, what I mean is, should you take a closed view of technology that you have as a country because you see it as a military advantage, or should you use technology as a tool of diplomacy to engage very deeply with other countries? So a couple of facts which are just, to me, quite plain, but perhaps many of you have a different point of view. The world currently still exists under the threat of mutually assured destruction. At the end of the Cold War, that didn't go away. So the major powers that are our great competitors can each essentially set the world on fire, unfortunately, and that is the overarching mechanism that through the last 75 years prevented a very large war from happening. Even now, at a tactical level, you see technology being used in Ukraine, but why isn't NATO and why isn't the US going in full bore and just providing everything they can to Ukraine? And the reason that you'll read in many analyses is because then the Russians will react very violently. And what does that point to? It points again to, don't get to a point where you invoke a strategic response. So in some sense, that deterrence is already working, even though technology is changing the tactical situation on the ground. Technology is not changing the strategic situation on the ground because mutually assured destruction still exists. So that is a natural cap to what technology can do today. Vinod Khosla recently said last week that in his view, generative AI models are more important and perhaps even more dangerous than nuclear technology. I believe this is a very dangerous line of thinking because under the constraints that I've just described, you're basically saying that you see technology now as a way to constantly differentiate as opposed to engage. Where the US loses today is not that we don't have the best weapons and we need more technology to differentiate our weapons even more. Where the US loses today is that China can walk into any country of the world and say, here's a loan, I'll build you a dam, I'll build you a railway, here's factories, here's a Huawei telecom system, here's engagement for you. I will uplift your economy. Now, whatever you think of that, separate that, but that's the deal. Where are we going with that level of engagement? We don't have the capital to spend in the way that China spends, but we have the technology to spend in the way that China cannot spend. And technology is our biggest ally in creating a world where people look at America as a partner again. So my view is technology for engagement, not technology for punishment.
No, I think it's, as I take a look around the world situation, having, kind of from a military perspective, but, interesting enough is I view the world through a former governor of this state, former President Reagan, who talked about peace through strength. And I think it's a great philosophy for us to have. The Russia-Ukraine situation is very, very different than what we saw in Iraq, very different than what we saw in Afghanistan, very different than many of the conflicts we see going around the world, because what differentiates Russia is they have nuclear weapons and not a small amount of nuclear weapons. So that changes the dynamics when we see, great powers getting into some type of conflict. So I believe we have to do everything we can to avoid those. And I would argue that, and we're seeing it play out in Russia, that regional conflicts have global implications. There's people starving in Bangladesh because of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia right now. And other leaders in various parts of the world need to take a look at that and realize the impact that it's going to have on their economy. They still have to feed their people. They still have to have an economy. And then when it comes to technology, it's in our interest to use the technology to make sure that we have the strength we need to defend our countries, but also to improve the quality of life of the people that live in our countries. And I think that's a common interest for everyone that we can get behind.
And one of the vehicles by which to do that, I think, is through public-private partnerships. And I don't know, each of you have spent some time coming from private sector or now in private sector, having spent government, spent some years in a career in government. You are now exposed to both ends of this, have gained both perspectives. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about some recent examples that you've come across in terms of what you're seeing at State Department or what you saw at DoD, or even from the industry perspective, some shining examples of how government and industry can work together to confront some of these both geopolitical and more tactical or operational challenges confronting not just national security, but this broader definition of national competitiveness, building up a nation's capacity to adopt, to innovate, to invent new technologies, and really diffuse that to society and to the world for a better cause. So yeah, maybe I'll kick it over to you first, Nate.
Sure. So when I was a CEO and I would get hauled into a government meeting to talk about our partnership, usually what it meant was I was going to be compelled to give away my data that was going to get classified and I wouldn't get anything back. And it didn't feel like much of a partnership. And I would say 2 years into the war in Ukraine, the war has cast a dark cloud over the world, certainly over Europe. But most dark clouds have a silver lining. The silver lining of that one, in my view, is the way that the war has catalyzed a real change in public-private partnership in some very positive ways. And I'll give you 3 concrete examples. So my team coordinates our non-military tech assistance to Ukraine. So satellite communications, cyber defense, telecommunications, that sort of thing. And in that arena, the Ukrainian government migrated its government enterprise to the cloud before, during, and immediately after the further invasion in February 2 years ago. And that allowed the Ukrainian government to continue to function, to continue to communicate, to continue to deliver services to its people, even as its physical infrastructure was destroyed. That was a very tight public-private partnership. Second, the provision of widespread distributed satellite communications in Ukraine has, again, provided resilient, redundant comms for the Ukrainians for a whole array of purposes. There, too, close collaboration between the public and private sectors. Third, I go all over the world, and people often ask why there haven't been more Russian cyber attacks in Ukraine. The answer, from my perspective, is there have been a ton of Russian cyber attacks in Ukraine. They just haven't been as effective as the Russians would have liked them to be because of a tight threat intelligence and information feedback loop among the Ukrainian government, the US government, other governments, and technology providers with a lot of infrastructure deployed in Ukraine that let them push patches and updates in a near real-time way that blunted Russian cyber attacks. So there's a good news story here about how public-private partnerships evolving in this tech foreign policy area.
From an industry collaboration standpoint in the private public context, I've been spending quite a bit of time in the Middle East, and there's a lot of very interesting things happening in the Middle East, many countries that are US allies. As an example, in Saudi Arabia, there's a new city being built called NEOM, which has many other sub-projects associated with it, and the investment on that project is somewhere over $1 trillion. It's a perfect opportunity, and it's envisaged as the city of the future. Now, you may look at that and you might say, I don't believe that this thing can be built. You might have other concerns about how it's being put together. But net-net, they are going to give it a very, very serious shot. And now, having met many people that work in that institution, I know that it's for real. At some scale, it will materialize.
They've broken ground on this.
They've broken ground. They've started building the line. They've made a lot of progress. So my point here is that is a perfect example of American companies being able to partner, let's say AI companies, such as the company that I run, being able to partner with an allied country in furthering the infrastructure for what could be the city of the future. It may be that down the road, we live in a world that is characterized by many NEOM-like settlements, cities, metropolitan areas. And this is an opportunity for us to learn. The Department of Commerce, not too long ago, invited an industry request for comment, to which I responded. And that was all about, should we ban this in AI? Should we ban that in AI? Should we put an export block on this in AI? And of course, the long letter that I wrote them was that, first of all, what are you talking about banning AI? What part of AI? Are you talking about classified data for which there are already rules? Are you talking about models? Are you talking about the technology that allows those models to be built? What are you talking about? So the AI industry, I know, has already seen such We're so nervous in the AI industry to engage in places, and half the time you're thinking, I go too deep in this and I do something interesting that's a great revenue opportunity for me. I mean, does this go away? Are they going to change their minds about this down the road? So this is an example of where American companies with their product leads in AI can engage with the world, drive revenue, drive success, learn from more data that's global in nature, but the shaky policies, the unclear policies around what's going to happen with AI controls makes it very problematic for people to invest in that hard. And I think that these are the types of things that we have to resolve if we want to use our technology as a means of engagement and as a means of true economic success. We are not being able to do that right now under this sort of sword of Damocles in terms of the regulation that's hanging over our head.
Yeah, I think, now, after spending 42 years in the military and now about 6 to 8 months in private equity and watching the innovation that's going on in the industry, it's really pretty incredible. And when I take a look at space, all the capabilities from satellites to communications to the systems that we see are pretty much being done by civilian industry. When I take a look at cyber, what's being done with artificial intelligence and everything else it is really critical that we get this into the hands of the troops on the ground to get that strength we need. And I would suggest, Ukraine is a place that we can really learn a lot of lessons. It's a large-scale, high-intensity combat environment, and if systems work in Ukraine, we can expect them to work in other situations, and we can get them into our systems much faster. The Department of Defense acquisition procurement is slow by nature. It's just the way it is. And certainly looking for opportunities to speed that up, because these getting the technology into the hands of our soldiers on the ground is extremely important, and it really is making a difference. And when we do that, we see that play out in Ukraine very, very thoroughly.
So Nate, you mentioned during the award ceremony, you quoted Andreessen's famous quote of "Software has eaten the world." I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on where do you see U.S. competitiveness when it comes to hardware? Now, in the broader strategic context, the U.S. innovation ecosystem in particular has been great at inventing new breakthrough technologies. That's one area where China has traditionally struggled. But we're trying to move to the right. We're trying to do better at deployment and scaling of new technologies, especially these deep tech technologies that are infrastructure heavy and require high CapEx in the early stages. So on one hand, the US is trying to move to the right. We're trying to do better at deployment and scaling and adoption. China, on the other hand, has a massive industrial manufacturing base. However, they're struggling and they want to move to the left. They're trying to build up their R&D infrastructure, their R&D community, trying to do better at innovation. So we're having this interesting, dynamic in this broader geopolitical tech competition. All to say, kind of where do you see hardware innovation fitting into where we should be going in the tech competition? And we can do the same thing, go down the line, and curious each of your thoughts.
Yeah, a few observations on that. I thought the conversation this morning between Mike Milken and Jamie was great. And the big takeaway there for me was how important immigration is to the innovative engine in the United States. And if you're pro-innovation and you're pro-economic growth and kind of pro-American technology leadership, you really have to be and ought to be pro-immigration. So that is point one. I think the wellspring of American hardware competitiveness, just like every other area of our strategic competition, relies upon an immigration policy and a cultural place in the world that continues to make the United States the destination of choice for people who want to build globe-spanning businesses. Second, look, I went to school and came of age at a time when we were reading books like The World is Flat and The End of History, and I get pretty clear the world's not flat, right? History didn't end. So during most of my adult life, global supply chains were optimized according to basically one variable, right? And that was cost. And now it's become abundantly clear, because of the pandemic, because of sort of the resurgence of great power politics in the world, that global supply chains need to be optimized for more than one variable. We need to optimize for resilience and security in addition to cost. And we have illustrative examples of what is at stake if we get it wrong. In my arena now, take telecom as an example. 30 years ago, sitting in these chairs, in addition to Nokia and Ericsson and Samsung, there was a robust global ecosystem of telecom hardware manufacturers. Bell Labs, Alcatel, Lucent, Motorola, you could sort of go down the list. A lot of those companies are gone. The ones that remain are not nearly as strong as they used to be. And there's an example there for us. There's a lesson around coordinated approaches, corporate complacency. Of course, there was a China story of IP theft and subsidies of Huawei. But if we look now to the future, I think we can expect that Huawei playbook to get run against every other key technology area, every key hardware area. And we, the like-minded, generally like-minded, rights-respecting, technologically capable democratic societies of the world need to be coordinated in how we deal with this. Yeah, sure. Amir.
So I'll share with you a few facts. The question was around American hardware and our ability to differentiate this. You started off with immigration. About 75 to 80% of the computer science students and the electrical engineering students that are enrolled in master's programs in the United States are foreign-born. 75 to 80%, number one. So anything that we do to close that down, anything that we do to make these people feel unwelcome in this country, anything that we do to create trouble for them of a personal nature, is going to be a deterrent to innovation and the American edge. If you look at many of the successful startup companies, including American silicon companies, many of them are actually founded, I would say the majority, are founded by people that weren't born here, number one. Number two, from a technology standpoint, and this is good news, there are companies like Grok, G-R-O-Q, an American company, that's come up with, for example, an AI accelerator chip, which takes a very different architecture to NVIDIA's chips. It combines memory and processing cells on the same die. And for smaller memory models, up to about 220 megabytes per chip, it can actually produce performance that's much, much faster than NVIDIA GPUs. Now, the advantage of this is that you can produce it at about 12, 14 nanometer technology, which is available in the United States. So in other words, there are ways in which to get to higher performance with a better idea in a particular domain, even with the manufacturing infrastructure that we have now. Of course, now that that idea is out there, other people can try and copy it on a lower feature size and get even better performance, but that's why the only competitive advantage, even in hardware, is to run fast. So nothing changes that. Nothing changes the fact that the world in which the printing press was invented, and then, at the time in the British Empire, the British said, nobody can use the printing press other than us. And that was the case for dozens and dozens and dozens of years. That's not going to be the world in which we live in anymore. If the printing press is invented, then at max you'll have a few months. You better invent a better printing press, because trying to think that you're going to protect that one forever, that world is gone. And it's probably a good thing. And the last thing that I'll say, sorry?
Okay.
Okay. The last thing that I'll say is that from my standpoint, again, American hardware is multifaceted. We've always had, for example, in aviation, we've had a fantastic edge. And that edge has now been slowing down. So the question is why? The time that it took from the Wright brothers' flight, to the first Boeing 737, that period of time, and the time between the 737 and now, they're roughly equal periods. Does that blow your mind? What happened? From the Wright brothers to the 737 and the 737 to today. What happened? Why is it that building 1 mile of road in America now is several times more expensive than building 1 mile of road in France? How? So the question is, our ability to differentiate on physical industries, hardware, physical industries, aviation, the edge that we did have, where has that gone? Last example, TSMC was asked to, for security, national security reasons, establish a plant in the US. If you go look at what the TSMC management is on record as having said about why that plant is running into trouble, why that plant is delayed, it's all about labor willingness. They say that the labor willingness, the training element in the United States is just not up to par. So my point is, these are not criticisms, these are facts. And if we want to do more than pay lip service to why our edge is eroding and why we're falling behind and how we get our hardware to be more competitive, then we first confront those facts and then in a very laser-like, focused way, go and solve those problems. I don't see too much happening in solving the types of problems that I've described. I see no one trying to make the cost of infrastructure come down. I see no initiative to make highways in America less expensive. I mean, we know what the problems are, we're not solving them.
I'll just touch real quick. I really want to follow up on what the ambassador said, the importance of us taking a look at our supply chains. That's one of the things we learned in Ukraine is there's many systems that we don't have the capability to manufacture anymore, and it's a supply chain is only as good as its weakest link. We found that out during COVID, and we have to invest, probably from the government, to buy that insurance so we have assured access to the systems and the parts that we need. If we have a system, whether it's chips or whatever you want to call it, and we're dependent on a country and we don't have assured access, then we've got to kind of plan for that. And we've got to plan ahead while we may have the time, some time and some money to set ourselves up so we have a supply network. One of the things we used to always talk about, you never want to be a one-option commander, a one-option person. If that option is not available, you got to be able to quickly, especially in combat, to be able to switch that. So having a robust, guaranteed access to a supply network is really important for all of us, and we have to pay for it.
And I mean, this is more of a DoD perspective, but throughout American history, or at least in the early days of the post-war era, the American defense industrial base was that market mover in terms of American manufacturing capacity. And like you were saying, Amir, over time that we've lost that memory, that muscle memory of learning how to build things here in the United States. And that's something I think will be a key battleground in the strategic competition going forward. So we have a little over 6 minutes left, and this is my favorite question, so I'm excited to hear your perspectives on it. And maybe, General McConville, I'll start with you, which is, and this is a question that we ask at SCSP all the time with some of our interlocutors, because I think it really helps boil down to the key questions or the key takeaways that I'm hoping the audience can leave here today with, which is, if you had, and perhaps you had a personal experience with this, if you had 3 minutes with the President of the United States, what would you raise with him or her as the most pressing challenge before us and policy priority laying before at the nexus of technology and national security?
Yeah, what I would say, and I've had a chance to do that on many occasions, but and now I can say it a little differently, but I'd say 3 things: people, data, and getting back to supply chain. And what I mean by the people side of the house is, it's great to have great technology, but without people, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, most battles are won by the will of people to fight, and we've seen that play out in Ukraine, and we've seen that play out in other places where if you don't have good people serving the country in all roles, not just the military, so we need to make sure we're inspiring young men and women to serve their country in many ways, asking what they can do for their country. The second thing is on the data side. It's interesting. I'm a combat aviator and all these type things, but data is the future. And it's playing out in Ukraine. We're starting to get insights to just how important the ability to have multiple sensors that can pick up where enemy positions are, move that data very quickly to some type of command and control system. There's so much data, you've got to have artificial intelligence involved that to help commanders make decisions very quickly, and then moving that data securely to the systems that can provide the effects that you need. And the ability to show you can do that will deter future enemies, because the best way to win without fighting is demonstrate you can win by fighting. And the last thing I talked about in the supply chain thing, it's something that it needs to be a national effort, so we're not dependent on a country that may not be there for us when it's time to fight.
And Amir, from a national competitiveness perspective, what would you say that
it's really a couple of things. Number one, I would say develop a package that our ambassadors, that our diplomats can take to a foreign nation. And that package is how you run your country productively on an American technology operating system. And by operating system, I don't mean Linux or Windows, the whole shebang, the entire infrastructure. Package American software and hardware infrastructure in an engaging way and explain to other countries why they should be running their country on American technology, because that is the biggest uplift that they can see economically. And it also creates very, very tight ties with those nations. I don't know that we do that today. The second thing I would say is that for American entrepreneurs, incentivize exports like you've never incentivized exports before. Do whatever you need to do, subsidize, give tax breaks, come up with stuff, but incentivize exports like you've never done that before. The third thing, because that brings volume to our producers. The ability to sell abroad brings volume to the bulk of the world doesn't live in America. The bulk of the world lives outside America. The more we sell outside America, the more we have benefits of scale, the more competitive we get. So that's the second thing. And the third thing I would say is that really frankly for innovation in the US, we should really look at things like, and think about CFIUS, ITAR, export compliance, control, all these regulatory lockdowns that we have that for many smaller companies are basically impossible and intractable because there's just too much ink to deal with. Where can we pare these down? Where can we safely create room for more flexibility? Where can we take some of the sword of Damocles effect and remove that from the heads of an entrepreneur that's always worried about, oh my God, there's just so much law that there's no way my small company can even fathom the law. It's like the 2 million lines in the US tax code. We're probably all somehow guilty of something, but none of us know it. So that's the kind of thing that you want to avoid. These are the 3 suggestions I would make.
And Ambassador Fick, wanted to flip the script on you a little bit. Instead of the president being in government right now, if you had 3 minutes with a fictional CEO of a bajillion-dollar market cap company, what's the top line message you would deliver to them on the national security technology?
I appreciate you changing the framing to make it a little less awkward for me right now. I do talk to them all the time, and in the beginning of my time in this role, my first 24 trips and meetings were with my counterparts at our closest allies around the world, and the senior leaders of global technology businesses who are increasingly almost state-like actors on the global stage on these issues. And so my big thematic messages to them are twofold. One, the reality in a democracy, in a transparent, generally transparent democracy, is that our foreign policy on any topic is only ever as strong as our domestic policy. It's just the way it is. And so it is very difficult for the United States to have a credible foreign policy or to have moral authority on a topic if our domestic house on that topic is not in order. And the specifics of that, of course, vary by technology area, but that's just a reality that I think we need our senior leaders of global businesses to internalize. The second thing that I say to them is government can't be them. It doesn't work if government is them. Government has to be us. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people requires that government be us. So we need those CEOs and businesses to be understanding of letting their people go for a couple of years, encouraging them to go for a couple of years, and spend some time working in public service. And it doesn't have to be 30 years, although it can be. It can be 3 years.
Or 40.
40. 3 or 30, 4 or 40. I just want, we just need, especially in these fast-moving areas, some tidal ebb and flow so that we have people in government who understand the technologies, and we have people running the companies who have some sense of the public good.
Great. And I think, we're running up on time. I think that's a great note to end on. So please join me in thanking our distinguished panel for having this conversation today. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.